the best coaches in the game. We really ain't playing. We regroup up in the Slack chat where the coaches debrief. We be piecing these puzzles, occupy the chunk of the pie. Ain't no lie when we hit the block, helmets casket is top. You be seeing helmet after helmet, helmet after helmet. First place, second place, fifth place, eighth place, 12th place, 15, 16, 20. So many helmets, you got blurred vision, we got too many. Get your check. Oh man, shit. They got us fucked up. Army, regroup. We pledge always to have that edge. We don't fire warning shots. Competition just dropped. We locked and loaded before lock. Whatever the time, yeah. Do you even correlate?
Being the best requires a willingness to outwork your competition. There's always someone smarter, faster, sharper, more naturally gifted to come around.
Welcome back. It's the divisional round. This is FantasyFling. We are taking a look at it. Cash game plays, tournament plays on Yahoo. Let's get into it. All right, so we're going to start off with the game tiles over the domination station at dfsarmy.com. If you are a DFS Army subscriber, you have access to this. If you are not, now is the best time right before the season's over. We got NBA, we got NHL, baseball coming up in 10 weeks, all the things, all the sports, you name it, golf, whatever, NASCAR, we got it. So use code FANTASYFLING for 10% off a VIP subscription. And by the way, if you're here, hit that like button. We appreciate the feedback. So top game totals on the slate. Number one on Saturday, we got Jacksonville Jaguars traveling to Kansas City to take on the Chiefs. This is the highest game total on the slate. Kansas City has the highest team total at 30 points. I believe the last time these two teams squared off, Kansas City, they were pretty close to 30 points. They scored 27 points. So, lots of juiciness in this game, as we'll get to in my player pool. Next game, New York Giants, they got it done last week against Minnesota. We kind of saw that coming. Minnesota, they just don't have a great defense, so we knew it was just a matter of time in the playoffs before they were eliminated. And, a lot of people thought they'd be one and done, and sure enough, they were. So New York, though, they got a much tougher task this week going against the Philly team that's really just been the class of the NFC this year for really pretty much all year. So Philly has the second highest team total on the slate. What's good thing about obviously the playoffs is it condenses. We're getting really good teams, so we're not going to have the really low game totals like we've seen a lot this year. Philly, 27.75 team total and a 48-point game total. Another game that I really like as far as a game environment to stack, Buffalo and Cincinnati. So, this is a rematch of that game that was stopped, obviously, in the first quarter with Damar Hamlin. Glad he's making a full recovery. But this game is finally going to get played fully, and it's in Buffalo. So Buffalo has the 27-point team total, quite high, third highest on the slate, of course. And this game, projects as a game that could potentially go back and forth and hit the over. So 48.5. And then last, we have Dallas. They stomped Tampa last week, and this week, they will get a much tougher opponent, San Fran, who, was pretty close with Seattle early on in that game, but really pulled away from them and smashed Seattle in the second half. So 25-point team total for San Fran, 21 for Dallas, overall 46. And, we'll see if Brock Purdy can do it again. So I'm going to go over to my article, wrote this. It's on line at dfsarmy.com. It's available. So we are going to start with cash game players for this slate. I don't really love playing a ton of cash on small slates. And, the reason is most of the field is now condensed on a much smaller pool of players. So it is more difficult to cash in double ups and 50-50s and whatnot. Still play some head-to-heads. Still will play some cash, but I kind of shift to more of a tournament style player on these smaller slates. I'm sorry. So that said, we're going to start with the cash game players. Now, these are all players that are also viable in tournaments, but in tournaments, obviously, we are looking to target some lower owned players, some high variance players, that really can have the type of ceiling that if they go off can win a GPP. So quarterbacks, Patrick Mahomes, this is the highest game total on the slate. The Chiefs, they have the highest team total, 30 points. And really, both of these secondaries have been suspects at times this year. So I can definitely see this one going back and forth and hitting the over, which is, pretty good over 52.5. Mahomes, he was the number one fantasy quarterback on the season by a pretty good margin. So it goes without saying his floor is as safe as they come. Best player on the slate and, obviously playable in all formats. Now, probably where I will go in cash is Josh Allen. Just the $3 savings, very useful on this 4-game slate. So Buffalo and Cincinnati, this is that other game that I like with shootout potential. Allen, his 24.38 projection is just a fraction of a point behind Mahomes. And, he's $3 less. So I like that in cash. And then, of course, in tournaments, I will also have a lot of exposure to this game, stacking both sides with both Allen and Burrow. Now, running backs. My thought process this week, Christian McCaffrey is the top running back on the slate. So he's definitely playable in cash. It's a smaller slate. He's arguably the best in the league. He's a great cash running back this week. But I do think from a leveraging ownership standpoint, there is merit to fading him in GPPs as, he has seen a hit in his carries. He went from before Elijah Mitchell came back, 58% of the carries to 37% last week. So I don't love that, but he is a top play on the slate. And again, merit to fading him in GPPs. Now, Saquon Barkley, kind of the same thing. One of the top plays. He looked very explosive last week. Very good. Obviously, he's getting carries. He's getting receptions. So we love that. That said, he generally does not do as well when the Giants are losing, as they're obviously projected to do this weekend going against Philly. So, there is a path to him failing in a negative game script for Barkley. That said, there aren't many viable running backs on the slate, and, he's one of the league's best. So, obviously, he is a cash game consideration as well as tournaments. Now, ETN, we got to start 2 running backs. There's not many running backs in the $20 range, from $20 to $30. And ETN is one of the few that regularly gets about 15 to 20 touches in a game, even in a negative game script. Like last week, they were down 27 points. He still was not phased out and, did pretty well considering, the touchdowns weren't there, but regardless, he still got 15 to 20 touches. So we like that. Now, Jerick McKinnon, this is kind of a sketchy cash game play, but again, there's not a ton of options. So, if you want to pay down a running back, almost in the teens, I think with McKinnon, you kind of have to look at it like he's a wide receiver playing a running back role. And so if you look at his past, 5-6 weeks of the season, he got about 6.5 targets and 1.5 touchdowns per game. So if you just watch the Chiefs, the way they play, they scheme him open, and especially in the red zone, which is why he had so many touchdowns at the end of the year and double-digit points despite low volume in rushing. Now, wide receivers, this is, really where I love the pay-up options on the slate, specifically in tournaments. I think there is a great path to just have a completely different lineup by just paying down at running back and then paying up for the studs. So Chase, he's essentially a lock for 10 plus targets a game, an elite talent, and a great game environment. Cincinnati, they're going to need to air it out to win. He's definitely making my cash game lineup, and I do think he's playable in all formats. Stephon Diggs receiving prop for this game via the Sharp app. And by the way, if you guys are a DFS Army VIP, you get a month free of the Sharp app. DFS Army and the Sharp app, all the same. So check that out. I think using player props between making decisions, sometimes between players, really helps because nobody's sharper than Vegas. So Diggs receiving prop for this game, it's 10 yards higher than Jamar's via the Sharp app, and I do love them both in this matchup as well. They're playable in all formats. Now, A.J. Brown, significantly cheaper than both, especially Chase, but also Diggs. And he has a similar floor. He gets about 10 targets per game. He's got that over the last 6 games. So I love both Brown and Devonta Smith this week in all formats. Christian Kirk, the way the Jags keep this close is and win this game potentially is by matching fire with fire. So you're going to have to score. You're not just you don't have the type of juggernaut running game that you could just keep the ball out of Mahomes' hands. And we know Mahomes could score fast and at will. So they're going to need to score to do that, much like they did last week against Los Angeles. And Christian Kirk, his 23% target share is number 1 on the season in that offense. Just behind him, Zay Jones at 20%. Another guy I really like, Devonta Smith, $24. If you looked over the last half of the season, production-wise, Devonta Smith, he's practically the same guy in the Philly offense than A.J. Brown, and he's $4 less. So I love the discount. I'll take it. Zay Jones, speaking of discounts, $17. Every Yahoo lineup, you're going to need at least 1, maybe 2 players in the teens. So Zay Jones is that guy I'm rolling with this week. I think it's a great game environment, and I love his price. Now, tight ends, Travis Kelce. In the Sharp app, his numbers look really good. They're like over 90 yards this game. And in this game environment with a 30-point projected team total, it just can't be ignored. And also, Kelce is really due for some positive regression with the amount of volume that he sees. He obviously went crazy last year in the divisional round and that KC and Buffalo game. So both him and Tyreek Hill did, I believe. So I do like Kelce this week, specifically in tournament builds where I'm doing pay down at running back. Mahomes, Kelce stacks, those are much easier to do. So, Kelce, I think he's pretty much playable everywhere. Normally in cash, I won't pay all the way up. But if you do, not going to fault you, of course, with Kelce this week in this matchup. Dallas Goedert. So the Giants give up over 2.5 points above average to the tight end position, which is why Jesus has listed him as the top fantasy points per dollar play this week. Jesus, the domination station. I love Goddard this week. He is obviously popping there. And then if you're just looking for a punt option, I do think Hayden Hurst is the cheapest viable punt option on the slate. He's very feast or famine, but again, if it's a punt option in this game environment, he could potentially do well. So few defenses I listed here. Number 1, the top 1, Philly. I think there's a great chance that the Giants have just vastly overachieved and their Cinderella season goes up in flames this week versus the Eagles. This is my favorite pay up option on the slate if you're paying up, if you're trying to stick at about the minimum. Cincinnati Bengals, the Josh Allen turnovers, I don't know what's been going on, but they just continue, which is exactly how Miami defense ended up with 18 points last week and nobody wanted to play them. So they ended up being a great leverage play. Decent chance the Bengals hit value here if this trend continues, with Allen turning the ball over. Now, Kansas City Chiefs, kind of the same thing. Trevor Lawrence has been very Jekyll and Hyde. As was on full display last week, he had 4 interceptions to start the game and threw 4 touchdowns. So if you could start a defense at minimum pricing and get some turnovers, you are in great position. Now we're going to go to the tournament plays, the GPP plays, specifically quarterbacks. Hurts, I didn't list him as my cash quarterback just because I like Allen and Mahomes better. But the Eagles, they have the second highest team total on the slate, and it's the highest salary, which I do think hopefully will keep ownership down with all the elite options. So there are cheap stacking bringbacks that I like as well. The Hodgins and the Richie James and whatnot. So all sorts of stacking options here with Hurts and AJ Brown, who obviously are going to be expensive. But Devonta Smith as well, not far behind. And then Goddard, if you're doing double stack. So lots of ways to go there. Now, I was looking at projections and I was struggling to find a reason as why Burrow's projections are so low this week. Just thinking about, he's had like 7 games over 25 points this year. And in that game that they started versus Buffalo, it looked like Cincinnati was potentially going to win that game, just the way they were playing. Burrow went like 4 for 4, 54 yards and a touchdown. That said, they're down 2 linemen this week. So I think that's the reason why everyone's off of him and projections are low. I do think from what I'm seeing that he is going to come in as under owned. So I do hope that's the case, as I'll be looking to get positive leverage by being over the field on Burrow in tournaments. Trevor Lawrence, highest game total on the slate, and the Jags have proved several times this season, especially last week, they can score a lot if need be. So They'll need to score a lot to keep pace with Kansas City. I like Lawrence, stacks this week in tournaments. Now, moving on to the running backs for tournaments, Miles Sanders. His over-unders, they look incredible this week. Over projection I saw was over 100 yards rushing, which was surprising to me. And it's higher than anyone on the slate. And he's the issue that you're running with Miles Sanders is Boston Scott going to get the touchdowns? Is Kenneth Gainwell going to start getting carries? These type of things. So he's not a cash play for me, but I love salary savings that you get if you don't play Christian McCaffrey or Barkley and you play Miles Sanders and Miles Sanders smashes. Now you can afford Chase, Kelsey, Diggs, all these guys. So I do think I will have quite a bit of exposure to Sanders in tournaments. Now, Joe Mixon, he is that kind of player will win you a GPP or crash your lineup. There's rarely any in between with Joe Mixon. So for that reason, I want some exposure to him on the slate with limited running back options outside of the big three. Tony Pollard, tougher matchup, especially for Zeke, running the ball against San Fran's really good run defense. But Zeke gets passes out of the backfield. He's a receiving back. So, he does have 12 double-digit games this season and the kind of ability to take that screen pass to the house and break a slate. And if, he takes the screen pass 60, 70 yards, he's probably winning you a GPP at only $18. So CeeDee Lamb, he's another play for me this week. Almost made my cash pool, but I do love him in tournaments. A lot of exposure there. He has 30-plus point upside. And, top 3 wide receiver projection on the slate is obviously San Fran's harder to run on. So, they think they're probably going to go through the air a little bit more. So I like Lamb and game stacks with or without Prescott. If you're doing like a ping pong stack, for example, CMC and Lamb or Debo and Lamb type thing, don't necessarily need to have Dak in there. Debo. So a couple things I like here. With Debo, he could potentially be direct leverage off of Christian McCaffrey, who we know is going to be chalky. And, he did get a lot of usage last week. So 9 targets for 133 yards and a touchdown. With Chase, A.J. Brown, and Diggs on the slate, I do expect Debo to come in at lower ownership than those guys. Now, T. Higgins, kind of sad. He went from $17 last week to $21, and he really did nothing last week. I think they just think this is a more premier of a matchup where Cincinnati will have to do more and they'll air it out more. Yahoo tends to do that. So every once in a while he will really go off though. And I do expect him to be low owned. So, if the field is going to do a lot of the field that does play Burrow, we're expecting Burrow to be contrarian, but if they do a lot of Burrow to Chase stacks, you can get different in that regard by doing Burrow to Higgins, which you have to consider getting even more different on a small slate like this. And then also, if you're just bringing Higgins back with like Josh Allen and, Diggs stacks, which are expensive, a little bit of salary relief there. So I like that. Couple other plays at wide receiver. Now, Juju is one of those guys. He's kind of like Mixon, except, they're now priced pretty much the same, but he's going to get 12 targets or 3. There's really not much in between. So we're not going to, have a lot of exposure to Juju, but he is a GPP only play in Mahomes and Lawrence stacks for me. So we're fine with that. And, one thing that I will say is good about the Chiefs spreading the wide receiver, the targets out so often, and just being so much variance week to week is I think that'll keep ownership spread out overall in the field. So like Juju and Lawrence and Mahomes stacks. Lawrence stacks as a bring back, of course, and then just stack the Mahomes. Gabe Davis. So we already saw a little bit of magic from Gabe Davis, like we saw last year in the playoffs when he absolutely went off against the Chiefs. But last week he saw 10 targets and produced for 113 yards and a touchdown. So let's hope he can keep that momentum going against Cincy. I love him at his price, only $17. Allen stacks and as bring back in Burrow and Chase stacks. And then a couple other guys, Michael Gallup, bit underpriced relative to his role and this game environment. It's one that won't be targeted as much, specifically in stacks, as the field is going to be more focused on Cincinnati, Buffalo, Kansas City, Jacksonville. So I think it's a play you can use to get different in a small slate, whether you just stack him, in a mini game stack with like Christian McCaffrey or Debo, or, you do it in DAX stacks, or, even as a bring back in party stacks. So Kadarius Toney, $14. They traded for him. He had the hamstring issue, but he has showed the explosiveness that you wanted to see from him. The reason they traded for him, they have been trying to get him more involved. He got 3 carries for 26 yards and a touchdown in their last game. And with Mecole Hardman out, I think he's right back in play. I'll definitely be over the field with Toney at this price. Now, Dalton Schultz. And, we have to talk about on a slate like this, you need to embrace double tight end. He's averaged over 9 targets per game in his last 3 games, 4 touchdowns in that span. So we need touchdowns on Yahoo, and especially in tournaments. I like him in stacks and, just as a one-off and double tight end builds. And then Evan Ingram, as we've seen this year, he does have the potential to be the highest scoring player on the entire slate. He's only $17. I'll have plenty of exposure to Ingram double tight end builds, and of course in KC and Jacksonville stacks. So that is going to do it for my Yahoo plays for the divisional round. I'll be back one more week as we look at the conference championships next week. If you like this kind of content, be sure to subscribe, of course, and hit that notification button so you never miss an episode. Of course, as always, like, comment, subscribe, share, all the things. You want to hit that notification button because we'll be going live with Tournament Tactics here in a little bit. That's something you don't want to miss as far as some bright GPP minds with DFS Army, looking at FanDuel and DraftKings, assuming FanDuel doesn't cancel all their slates, but looking at GPPs for the 2-game slate and also the 4-game slate. So I wish you all the best of luck this week, and we will see you next week.